Welcome to Apollos Watered.
How y'all doing?
Oh, y'all. So it's Texas. There we go.
Texas. It is Texas, yes.
You know, I've moved recently to the South, so now I understand the difference between y'all and all y'all.
Yeah.
I hear those are two different things, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it just depends, I guess, on where you're from.
Okay.
No Southerners sound the same. In fact, I'm really not a Southerner, but I just live here.
Okay, well, we'll have to talk about that. But are you ready for the Fast Five?
Let's go.
Here we go. You have young boys. So chutes and ladders, or the floor is lava?
Actually, neither one.
Neither one?
They do more reading than anything else.
They don't play any games. What do they like to read?
Well,
do they like to read your books?
No, they're not ready for that. Although my oldest has read some Narnia, and he's only 7, so he's pretty impressive. Any games, we're actually trying to teach them how to play checkers and chess and Connect Four and that sort of stuff. I'm not much of a board game person, so I think I rubbed off on them.
How old are your boys?
7, 5, and 3.
Oh my goodness, you're busy.
I am.
I'm surprised you have time to even do this show.
Me too.
Here we go. This is what I also know, knowing a little bit about you. You're at Baylor University, but you're also a Texas fan. So Texas or Baylor?
When it comes to sports, it's Texas. When it comes to academics, Baylor. That's where I work.
That was a very judicious Jesus kind of answer. Like I affirm and I separate at the same time.
Yes.
Here we go. Question 3. Sorry about that. Well, I'll have to repeat that. Somebody's trying to call me and I turned my phone off, but unfortunately it's connected to my computer. Question 3. The best food in Texas is where?
Ooh. I eat a lot of fast food just because I have young boys. And so it makes no sense to go to a nicer place. I think that if I was just for myself right now, if I could go out with my wife to someplace, there's a cool place. I won't say it's the best food, but we're going to go to a place like the Greenhouse in Denton. So that's kind of be a place we could hang out if we had the time to hang out.
What's the name of the restaurant again?
The Greenhouse.
The Greenhouse.
Yeah.
What
I'm
kind
not
of
saying
food?
it's the best in Texas. I'm just saying for us, that's kind of, if we actually had a chance to go on a date, that's probably where we would go.
What do they do well?
I think it's very healthy food and it's delicious. So yeah, and I guess if we really could go on that date, they do have music late at night, but we don't catch that because we'd be home for our boys.
Oh yeah, you're busy with the boys. It's a miracle you even get to go out to eat.
Yeah,
we don't very often. Oh no, I understand. I've got 4 myself, so I fully understand. So here we go. Here's your next question. Because you're a Texas football fan, who's the better football player to come out of Texas? Ricky Williams or Vince Young?
Ooh. I'm going to go with Vince Young because he gave the championship. He delivered the championship. So it's hard to beat. Now, in the NFL, I think Ricky Williams had a better career. But if you're asking me who's best at Texas, I'm going to go with VY.
He was so good. I have to say, I loved watching them beat the snot out of USC. I hate USC. No offense to my USC people. No, be offended. I hate your football team.
It was a good game. I don't know if it's beat the snot. I'm just glad we won. We won by 1 or 100. We won.
So here we go. Here's the next question. If you could pick a movie title for your life, what would it be and why?
What a strange guy. I just don't fit the boxes. I don't. And so people don't know where to place me. We have I'm black. Well, no, I'm a Christian. Well, no, sociology. People just don't know where to place me. So I just say, what a strange guy.
Maybe that's why I like your stuff so much, because I feel like I don't fit. places all the time, because people are like, you're a pastor? Yeah, but you know, you're like academic? Yeah, but so I understand that. I really feel that. So those are our fast five. But here we go. Let's jump into, you've written 2 books recently. I want to talk about the most recent one first, if that's okay. And I do want to touch the other one, because I think both of them are very important works, and I thoroughly enjoyed both of them. But we have your most recent book, Beyond Racial Division. And you can see I've highlighted, I've gone all the way through it. I mean, the spine is bent. I've really enjoyed this book, and I think I've really just been impressed with your approach to different things. But in your title, it lays it out. And honestly, when I first saw the title, I thought to myself, what is that? I didn't exactly know the parallel points that you were creating there. And in the subtitle, for those that can't see the book or don't have it in front of you, it's a unifying alternative to color blindness and anti-racism. So I know this is a bit remedial, but can you just give us a quick synopsis of those two positions, first of all, the anti-racism and the color blindness? Let's hear what you got for that.
Okay, so colorblindness is probably a little bit easier to just state. I mean, colorblindness is basically the idea that we defeat racism by ignoring race. That as much as possible, we try to ignore race. And if we're not ignoring race, then we're not treating people differently by race, and therefore racism ends. And so that's really, in a nutshell, to people who advocate colorblindness, talking about race is part of the problem. We talk about race, then we're noticing race, and then that creates part of the problem. So that's colorblindness. Anti-racism was a little more complicated in that different people may define it different ways. For my book, what I decided to do is read the literature on it, read people who are claiming to be anti-racist, and to see what they had in common. And I boiled it down to 3 major ideas, although there could be more. I'm not saying this is the last word, but 3 major ideas. And one is that racism is multifaceted. It's individualistic as well as structural. 2 is that we have to be very deliberate, very proactive in tackling racism. That if we address, we can't just sit back. We got to be aggressive in dealing with racism. Now, honestly, those first 2 points I agree with. And if that was all anti-racism was, I probably would call myself an anti-racist. That's the 3rd point that I think creates a lot of problems with anti-racism. And people may disagree, and I always challenge people, then find me the anti-racism book that doesn't do this. The anti-racism 3rd point is the role for whites is to do what people of color want them to do. And that comes through in those books. And I don't know how you can read those books and not get the sense that it's preaching to whites, hey, you need to do what people of color want you to do. And it may ask different things, different books ask for different requirements of whites, but that's what it boils down to. So that's how I see both of those ideas.
So then you see the first part, the colorblindness, you see the anti-racism, and then you're struggling with that. Now, first of all, I just want to park on that, where you say the anti-racism and you're struggling with it. What made you go, okay, this isn't sensitive, or this doesn't allow white people to be a part of the conversation? What was the impetus? Because rarely do people catch that dynamic, or they might, like me, I would feel that going, wait a minute, because I've been to conferences and I'm saying, I want to work through this. I have a church that's diverse. I want to be able to talk about these issues, but then suddenly it's like, I'm not allowed in the room. And that, I mean, I feel that, but what made you see that?
Yeah, I think that from a relatively young age, I've, even before I was a Christian, I noted on how selfishness, how depravity is, in all groups. And just hearing how people were talking about it, and this before I really dived into this, I just had the feeling this was wrong. This was not going to work. Even though I liked a lot of the ideas I was hearing, it's like, but then when we get to how we solve it, we get to this, and that doesn't seem to be working. And so, so I had a gut feeling. Now, once I started diving into the research and literature, it was confirmed. But yeah, at first it was, I would love to say that I was looking at the research. It just came clear to me, that would fit in with this sort of social image I have as a scholar. But it was, honestly, it was more of a, I would see how people were acting. And then I would just realize this wasn't working. I'll give you just one example. When I was in grad school, I was what we call a graduate assistant for a course, an intro to sociology course. And the professor at the time, who was not a graduate student but was teaching the course, she was talking, and this was before anti-racism was called anti-racism, but it was probably anti-racism. But she was trying to show the whites just how horrible people of color had it. And she was talking about historical racism and stuff like that. And the way she did it, was, I guess, trying to be guilt-inducing. I was in the back of the class, and I was looking younger than I do today. So students forgot that I was a TA. I looked like another student. I just looked around, and the white students, they weren't being convicted of their guilt. They're rolling their eyes. They were thinking, oh, brother, whatever. And some things like that told me that this does not work as far as bringing people together on your side. So initially it was just sentiment, and then we look at the research, it confirms that this does not work.
I know this is going to sound trivial, and I probably should have asked this at the beginning, but you mentioned you don't fit in categories. Yeah. Being a sociologist, what made you want to be a sociologist? And you also mentioned you're not from Texas. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in California.
Oh, okay. So are you one of the people that came to Texas or did you start the trend? So everybody moving from California to Texas, is that it?
I was very young when it happened, and it wasn't I guess it was quasi my choice. My mom asked me to go and help out my grandparents, but it wasn't that I was trying to get away from California.
Okay.
I mean, gorgeous weather. If I had my choices, I probably would have stayed in California. But it is what it is. You asked me a question about why I went to sociology. That's an interesting question. I originally got my master's degree in economics because I got my undergraduate degree in economics. Why I got my degree in economics, I don't know why I chose economics. I just did. I'm the first person in my family to go through college. And so I didn't have people to sit with me, hey, what do you want to do? Da, da, da. For whatever reason, economics sounded cool. So I took it. I thought that that's what you did. You went to grad school, but I took a sociology course. And I enjoyed that more than my economics course, the sociology of the family. And there are interesting questions about divorce effects and raising kids. And I thought, this is more interesting than economics. And so when I decided to go on to get a doctorate, I was going to go on in economics. I went on in sociology. So that one course changed my direction.
Okay. I was curious because you mentioned you don't fit in the categories, and definitely being sociology. And I love sociology. That's why I think I gravitate to your work and everything that's going on. But going back to our previous questions, we were talking about the two different positions. Of course, we have anti-racism and the colorblindness. You actually propose a third path that you call the mutual accountability model. And I love this because you've given us language, and really you've given language to me of something that I've been struggling with, because this is what we have actually done where we've been, but we didn't have a name for it, and you've named it. And I'm so grateful for that. But I want you to explain to us a bit, what is the mutual accountability model?
Okay, so here's my elevator talk. I got on the elevator, 5th floor, up to the 1st floor. Someone asked me, what's your book about? My book is about the best way to deal with our racial relations is to have better conversations with one another, where everyone gets to enter in, we can have healthy dialogue, and then we can find solutions that most of us can live with. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Now, obviously, once you start diving into it, it gets more complicated. How do you have healthy conversations? What sort of skills do we need to develop? How do we, gear towards that? What sort of venues to create for it? I mean, it gets more complicated as you get into it. But in a nutshell, that's all I'm asking. All I'm asking is we have better conversations where we bring everyone into the conversations. People of color are correct that for years, we were excluded from conversations. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But the solution, and, unfortunately, this is what's, it's not just my perception. I think that this is what some people are doing in anti-racism. They're overcorrecting that by saying, okay, we're in the conversation, but whites don't need to be in the conversation now. I think that, and research shows that works against finding better solutions, and it creates a backlash that just perpetuates the sort of conflict that we have in our society.
You were mentioning in your book, you talk about diversity training that's been mandated at certain different jobs. And
Yes.
you gave some pretty interesting research there that I thought was particularly fascinating, that companies that mandated diversity training,
Mhm.
and I don't know how much time passes in between that, but it actually works in the long run in a negative effect. Can you describe that for a bit?
Yeah, so in this research, what the researchers did was they looked at companies, they looked at the percentage of managers who were of color, and they looked at what the companies were doing in order to try to increase that. And then they came back 5 years later. So they had a 5 year span in between. I don't know if there's a lag effect in when they started diversity training, or you can't tell that. But this is what happens 5 years later. And 5 years later, companies that did mandatory diversity training, not voluntary, but mandatory diversity training, actually have fewer managers of color. Uh, that's Dobbins and Calvage. They're the ones who did that research. I think is one of the most important research as far as telling us about solutions. Because what it tells us is that you could want something that sounds like that's good, but at the end of the day, it does not have a positive effect on what you want to accomplish. And it doesn't, then we should rethink what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't rethink. We just keep going and doing the same thing over and over again, even though it doesn't work. What we need to do in order to bring more managers of color is opposite of what we may think. We think we have to dictate things to people, grievance committees and things of this nature. That actually also results in fewer managers of color, or at least it's correlated with that. What we need to do is to go to those white managers and let them work with us instead of trying to tell them what to do. And the companies that did that actually had more managers of color 5 years later. So this is what I mean, that when we try to shut people out of the conversation, it may feel like this is the best thing to do, and this is not just about being nice. I'm not just saying, hey, I care about white people and this is what I'm doing. I do care about white people. I'm married to a white woman, so I'm not saying I don't care, but this is not about me caring about white people. It's not about me, being a traitor in my own race. This is about what actually works. And this research shows that if you want more managers of color, the best thing to do is go to the white managers you have right now, get them on board, tell them, how can you help us? We'll give you responsibility in order to try to increase the diversity in our hire.
There's so much, again, what you've written, the research you've highlighted, the details that are there in dealing with these issues and showing just by research. This isn't just personal opinion. This is the research. This is the data. This is what it's pointing to. And that's why I like it, because it seems to me that it's not only well researched, but it's a highly pragmatic solution of offering these potential workable solutions. So then how do we, or should we, balance the obvious need for these practical solutions on the one hand with principles that may not be popular with the other side, or with the other, or with the secular culture more generally? So what do we need to do there?
Yeah, so this book was written by for InterVarsity Press, which is a Christian publisher. So I actually do have a book out there that it's like 10 years old, or maybe about 10 years old, called Transcending Racial Barriers, which is published with Oxford University Press. So it's a secular book. I can argue these ideas without bringing in any Christianity. I use secular theory, secular data, and so I have no problems if someone wants me to go and speak before a secular audience as to what approach we should use and why. It's kind of like forgiveness. I think forgiveness is a very important Christian principle. Important. Research has shown that people who forgive are mentally healthier. They're less likely to be depressed, or less likely to hold on to grudges, which creates anger and this sort of thing. You don't have to be a Christian to get the benefits of learning how to forgive others. So if you are a Christian psychologist who teaches about forgiveness, and teaching Christians how to engage in forgiveness, and a secular organization says, you know what? research shows that forgiveness is very important. Can you teach our people? Why wouldn't you do that? You know, why would, even if they don't ever become Christians and yeah, they don't have ultimate salvation, why not make their lives better here on earth, but teach them how to forgive? And that's the way I would feel about this. I can talk, you know, forgiveness, you can look at all the research, secular research, you don't have to go to the Bible. I don't have to look at the Bible. I can look at secular research and it reinforces the position that I have.
Mm. In the book, one of the things that really struck me is you give an illustration of a marriage, an abusive marriage, that really, in reading it, things became much more transparent to me of the positions then. It crystallized it in my mind. Can you just briefly give the illustration so people can help them understand it, because it really gives them an interesting, structure to hang their thoughts on.
Yeah, so I talk about a hypothetical situation where you have abusive marriage, where the man's very abusive to the woman. And in this country, in this society, divorce is not possible because people are going to say, well, she should leave them. And I'm not, I don't want to be misinterpreted saying that I think these women should stay in abusive marriages. So I just want to be very clear about that. So I create this boundary that you can't leave, all right, for whatever reason, Okay. All right, so what can you do? I think that does capsulate a lot of our racial problems where we have centuries of racial abuse and we can't divorce each other. So I think that it's fair in that sense. And if you just say, all right, the man just stopped abusing and then that's that, and we'll just not talk about it, then you're talking about colorblind perspective, right? So you're talking about colorblind perspective, we don't talk about racial issues, we don't talk about race, and things just go on. And we know, those of us who understand human nature, that will not create a healthy situation. The damage has been done. You got to work through it. On the other hand, as tempted as may be, the solution is not to give the woman total power, because she too is a fallen creature. And a lot of times, people who are abused can turn into abusers. Research shows this, right? Child abusers are more likely to have been abused as kids. We can and should feel for them, their abused as kids, but we cannot allow them to go on to abuse more. And so that's not gonna end well either. We know what the solution is. The solution is the couple, if the man has stopped abusing, still needs counseling to learn how to work through their issues and to find ways of changing their marriage so they both can benefit and thrive in that marriage. Things have to change. This is not, my analogy is, just go talk and nothing changes. Things have to change. It has to change in a way that's healthy. And what we've done is we've chosen one or two unhealthy ways of changing our racial situation.
So we have to rethink how we go about this and how we interact, and the personal responsibilities that are there. And as you said, there's, in the one side of the marriage, the colorblind part of that analogy is that the woman can't really, she's got her own issues to deal with, not her own issues, but rightfully so. She's dealing with the effects of the abuse, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, everything. So she can't just let him back. There are consequences for the action. And the colorblind approach kind of makes it so there aren't really any consequences, but there are consequences. The other side, as you were saying, is that it goes so far where then the woman, she becomes the abuser in the situation, because she says, and if I remember correctly in the book, you abused me for 15 years, I'll abuse you for 15 years. And then it kind of goes on, and that doesn't work either. But there's the part where he comes back and he says, please forgive me for the abuse that's done. I know there are consequences. I'm going to work through it to rebuild your trust. And yet you are working through the anger and the bitterness, and there's that mutual conversation part that's there. That's what I thoroughly enjoyed. That really did resonate with me. But it seems to me that a lot of the angst and underlying then confusion regarding issues of race have to do with these definitions, because some people don't even like the definitions that have been supplied. And that's what I see a lot of the fighting going on back and forth, especially online. It's about words and how words are being used, and everybody assumes that their definition is what that person means. I know I do. I'm sure other people do as well. Do you have any suggestions for helping people to make sure that they're really understanding what people mean when they're talking about these issues?
This is where I talk about active listening, and this is where we have to have that, because racism means different things to different people at this point in time.
Mm.
White supremacy means different things to different people. Colorblindness means different things to different people. So we can't just say the words and assume people understand what we're saying. We have to say the words and they have to hear us out. We need a deliberate, constructive conversation where we clearly define our position and others help us to deal with that position and they define their position so we can find solutions. So oftentimes our conversations breaks down over definitions. Sometimes people use that in order to get out of conversations. Sometimes, if you're in a discussion with someone, you're uncomfortable, you want, you find some little thing to pick on them so that the conversation goes elsewhere. We got to get away from doing stuff like that. If we want solutions, we got to find ways we can communicate with each other and learn how we can communicate with each other in ways that they can hear us. So yeah, I think that is a key important aspect of this.
So go back for a second, because I think that the act of listening is something that people hear, and I want you to describe what that is for a bit.
Okay, so as a researcher, when I do qualitative methods, which means when I interview people or do focus groups, something like that, I have to engage in active listening. Active listening is listening so I can understand where they're coming from, not listening so I can argue with them or listening to win a debate. So my purpose is simply to understand. The example I like to give, I think I gave this in the book, is several years ago, I did a book on atheism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Christian, all right? So I'm a Christian, I'm happy as a Christian. I intellectually find atheism bankrupt, just to be honest. But my respondents, this is what they believe. I listened for the sake of hearing them out and understanding why they've accepted atheism, the rationale, how they grow up, how they feel about religion. One of the techniques that you use in active listening is you paraphrase what people say, and you put in your own words. And if you've captured the essence of what they're saying, then they'll say, yes, that's what I believe. If you've not, they'll say, no, here's what you're missing. And then that gives you another opportunity to really listen. So these are some of the things that you can do in order to engage in active listening.
You mentioned the Sixth American. Mm-hmm. Describe who this Sixth American is, because your book is aimed at an American audience, but I do want to come after this. I actually want to talk about how this might be able to play out on an international audience, because we have an international audience. But what does it mean? What is the Sixth American?
Yeah, I actually did not coin that term. That came from Michael Emerson in his work. The Sixth American, you can think about it as we have 5 major racial groups: whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans. Mike argues that there's a 6th group. Now, they're not a racial group in the traditional sense, but they have their own unique racial reality, and that racial reality is shaped by the fact that they're very multiracial. Their friendship, the social networks tend to be racially mixed. They freely date and marry interracially. Their job places are racially mixed. They may live in a racially mixed neighborhood. Their world revolves around being of a lot of different races. Whereas, when he's talking about traditional white racial identity, whites who tend to hang out with other whites for the most part. Blacks, same thing, other blacks. So this is what he calls a 6th American.
So this is the person that engages a lot of different cultures because they live in that world.
Yes.
Which makes sense to me. We did an early segment of our show called Cross-Culturing, and it was just talking about cross-cultural relationships and friendships and more anecdotal kind of stories of stupid things and misunderstandings and things like that, in order to help people see that, hey, this is going to be a little bit awkward, but it can be fun. If you poke a little fun at yourself, you don't take yourself seriously. And I had this guy from Chicago, and he's from the city, and he goes, I don't really listen to those episodes. And I said, why? And he's like, well, it's not really relevant because I'm already doing it. This is my everyday experience. This has never been a non-issue for me. Everywhere I go, the school I go to, my work, everywhere, it's always different ethnicities. But I think a lot of people are still in a monocultural mindset, although that's changing, because we've seen that happen in the United States. It's changing all the time. And yet the enclaves seem to become much more tribalistic, where people are becoming more resistant because they do feel like it is forced on them. How do we go about trying to freely engage in those conversations? I mean, what do we need to do? In some ways, it's very practical. It's walk up to someone that you don't know and engage in a conversation, but at the same time, that feels a bit forced. Like, I don't want to
I don't recommend people doing that, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
I don't recommend people walk up to a stranger and say, "Hey, let's talk about race." You know,
not that, but
if someone does with me, I would be trying to get out of that conversation. I don't know you, but let's talk about race.
Well, I think what I more meant was I was in grad school, and when I moved to New England, and we moved in January. So we got like inundated with snow. We had one car, and I lived 20 minutes from the school. And in the area we lived in, every other house had an occupant, because it ended up being summer homes that people didn't stay in, and they were just renting it out to us because they needed the cash. And my wife was going so crazy. She's like, "You need to bring home a friend. You need to bring home someone for dinner." And so I walked up to a guy in the class who was answering a lot of the questions. And I basically walked up to him and said, "Would you be my friend?" I mean, it was just like, as a kid, your mother moving to a new neighborhood, my mother would walk me over to the kid down the street, knock on the door and say, "Hey, we're new here," and, play. But you don't do that. You don't want to talk about someone just to say, "Oh, I want to talk to you just because you're Black, or because, you're Indian." That doesn't play well, because, as you said, that's not the intent behind it. It's somewhat admirable, but it's also mistaken, because a person is not just that ethnicity. I mean, we are that, but we're more too, besides our skin color.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm much more than being an African American, but I am an African American.
Yes.
Part of what I'm talking about, of course, is having a conversation, which means we're trying to find solutions, which means I'm trying to convince other people of the importance of what I want. So I'm trying to engage in persuasion. Now, in this society, we're so polarized, we think of that as a dirty word, because persuasion is, you're trying to force people. You're in a class, professor forces people to reiterate something, or a preacher's trying to force you, or things of that nature. But actually, that's not a good source of persuasion. That's not how persuasion is usually done. One of the things you have to do is you build rapport with people. So this is why you don't go to some stranger and talk about a explosive issue such as race. Let's first ask them how the weather is and that sort of thing before you even get to that. That is not where your influence is going to be, and probably should be. You start with your own friends, or you develop friends that you disagree with, but you understand better. That's a way in which you begin to learn how to talk to people in ways that they can hear you. But you build rapport, you find out what you agree upon, you admit when they have a good point. These are the sort of things that help us to persuade others. And it does so in a way where we build community with each other rather than build this polarization that we got.
What do you see then is the biggest issue? I mean, I don't want to say biggest issue. Let me rephrase that. The book is relatively new. It coming out just a month or two ago.
Yeah, about a month ago. Yeah,
about a month ago. So it hasn't gained a lot of pushback yet, I would think, just because it hasn't been out that long. What pushback have you received thus far, and what pushback do you anticipate receiving? Because you do kind of indict the two different positions, and you say there's a third way.
Yeah.
So what opposition do you anticipate?
Yeah, I think that the extremists, people who are extreme colorblind, extreme anti-racists, are not going to like the book, quite simply because it's threatening to them. Because right now, the idea of doing this is relatively small, but what if it catches on? I think that there's a lot of people in the country that would appreciate this idea. And so what if it catches on? Well, then if you're advocating for colorblindness, all of a sudden you have this competitor now, this new competitor. Same thing with anti-racism. So I think that both of those would be problematic. As to what, I can talk to you about people that I've had discussions with throughout the years, those who are colorblind, just mentioning race, they're gonna have a problem with that. They probably don't like the fact that I argue that things such as institutional discrimination is a real thing. Because when I've talked to people with colorblind, they argue that they concede that racism can happen, but they think it's isolated, that just happens infrequently. So they're not saying that there's no racism anywhere in the country, to be fair to their position, but I think it's very isolated. And so talking about institutional discrimination is something that they probably will push back against. I think the anti-racists will make arguments such as, well, it's not fair to ask a person of color to enter this discussion because of the baggage they carry. And that's something that I've heard. That I'm not concerned about justice. I just want to feel goodism. That I'm too nice to whites. I've actually heard that one before. So those are some of the things I would anticipate from some of the people who are anti-racist.
Not that this really matters, but I mean, maybe it does. Which side do you anticipate being more resistant?
If I was forced to answer that question, I'm gonna guess the anti-racist side is gonna be a little bit more resistant, but I think I'm gonna get resistance on the other side as well.
I think you will too. Maybe it's because more the anti-racist position appears, and again, I might have my own. I mean, I have my own lenses, but it's more vocal, or at least culturally speaking. I mean, maybe that's a wrong perspective on my part, but working through that's what I wondered is that you're going to get heat from both sides. I was reading something that Tim Keller had written the other day, and he mentions that he often gets nailed for advocating a third way. And I think that's what I'm hearing from so many different people. And one of the frustrations that I see, it's like you're either or you're on this side or you're on that side. And usually there's something in between. Experience shows me that there is something in between that is much better of a solution, because both solutions on both sides often seem to be quite frustrating. But that's the world we live in. And again, this is why I think your research is so important, because it is based on research. This isn't personal opinion. This is backed up by what you can see in the statistics, even in the institutional racism. And that's probably the biggest in the people that I'm interacting with. And I have both the activist and I have the colorblind, but more often more of the lay people to the discussion, if you will, are more on the colorblind side. The activist is the person that is I mean, outright, calling out and crying out, and understandably so. But the thing that I'm trying to do is trying to figure out, how do you call people out of that colorblind mentality, to show them that there is such a thing, not just as personal sin, individual sin, as you mentioned, but structural sin, or structural prejudice. What was the terminology that you used? I don't want to misquote you. You said structural racism, institutional racism. Okay, describe actually what that is for a moment, because I know some people they hear that, they automatically turn off.
Yeah. I would just argue that there are ways in our social structures that work to the disadvantage of people of color, and it does not require a person to be individually racist. There's just some certain ways that social structures work against people of color. I would expound on that I think that this happens because of historical effects. That you set a society that benefits whites, and even though you start passing laws to go away from that, you still have vestiges of that there. I would also argue that historical effects in that things that happened in the past impact us today. There's a reason why I'm the first person in my family to get a college degree. It's not because I'm the smartest. So that impacts a lot of chances today. And I do think that there's still some subtle forms of prejudice out there that people hide, but comes out in awkward moments.
Well, you were even mentioning about how certain people you can see on resumes by their name. If you put, certain names that are much more, I don't know, culturally European, and they're more likely than someone who's got more of a name that comes more that Jamal. Perceptively, or Jamal, or I mean, Latanya or something along that line, whatever those names would be. The hard part, I've always been trying to figure out, because we've tried to not have the colorblind approach, but to say, even in our leadership at our church, we wanted our leadership to be representative of the community, rather than like something like affirmative action. We were saying, is our church representative of the community, number one, in its makeup? And number two, is our leadership representative of that as well? Rather than say we're just going to look for someone like that, it's more like we want to find the qualified person, but it doesn't, the qualified person, no matter who they are, but we are going to make sure that we do our due diligence to investigate all of those who make that up in our, but a lot of people have a harder time with that, especially I think with the institutional part. The institutional part is something that I think a lot of people don't know. And I've had people tell me this. They said, legally, there is no such issue. Legally, it's fine. Matter of fact, it's gone the other way. And that's where I stop and I go, maybe not legally, not on paper, but emotionally, there's a weight and there's experience and there's development with that. And it's not the same opportunities. How do you then, I mean, is this book help designed, you think, I mean, in what you hope would be as a conversation starter to generate those conversations so that those things can be recognized and as much as they can be on this side of eternity fixed?
You know, you're touching on some of the things that I dealt with when I was writing about multiracial churches.
Okay.
As far as leadership, I do think that churches have to be deliberate in their leadership structure. I don't want to say that it has to have a quota, but I think and I think you hit right on the head. If you want to represent a multiracial community, you have to have multiracial leaders.
I agree.
You don't want to see someone up there that reminds them of them.
Yes.
So when I was talking more about interracial churches, multiracial churches, I would talk to the churches about how are you selecting your leaders and what can we do? How does it work against people of color? Make sure you're not selecting your leaders by your friend of a friend, because if your network is white and their network is white, you're going to select another white leader.
Right.
So there are ways in which people can look at that whole question.
And that's not, obviously, all these solutions aren't going to be done in this podcast, that's for sure. But I think your book is a big contribution going forward. I think it is a necessary thing, and I'm excited about that. But I want to change gears here for a moment. Mm-hmm. Not that we're moving beyond racial division, playing with the title there, not that we're moving beyond it, but I want to talk about One Faith No Longer, if that's okay.
Sure.
So so the title is One Faith No Longer, The Transformation of Christianity in Red and Blue America. And you wrote this with Ashley, how do you say her last name? Is it Cusick? Quisick. Yes. Okay, I want to make sure that I get that correct. I'm not as familiar with anybody that has a Q in their first part of their last name. And I never know what's silent and what is not. But your book struck me when I saw this come out, and it's by NYU Press. I thought, oh, someone has finally written about it, because I'm hearing more and more about progressive Christianity. And you guys wrote a book really about conservative and progressive Christianity, looking at the statistics. Now, that's the part out of the book that I just didn't like, because I'm not a statistician. So I'm like, skip. I don't even know how to read this. But give me the impetus behind this book. Why did you guys write this book?
Well, I can only speak for myself. You have Ashley, she can speak about why she wanted to contribute. I actually was on another paper. I did another paper that I got published and I was using this measure called thermometer scale, 0 to 100, how much you like a person. And what I found out was, and this, I wasn't looking for this, that mainline Protestants like atheists, Muslims, Buddhists, whatever, more than they like conservative Protestants. And I'm thinking, is that true? And so I looked some data, and sure enough, it was. So I wanted to understand this division, this conflict that's there, because up to that point, I was like a lot of conservative Christians. I thought, well, Christians and Christian, we're all one part of happy family. We just have a slightly different beliefs. It's much more fundamental than that.
You mentioned that it was so fundamental that you likened it to Hinduism and Buddhism, that they're actually two separate faiths.
Right. Yeah.
And
I'm not sure that they're that far yet, but I'm just saying, here's an example of how it could develop.
But it's moving along those type of lines. I understand you don't want to go too far into that, because that any illustration breaks down, and it's not always a one-to-one comparison. But looking at that, then, I mean, what led you to that belief? Because it seemed in the book you say that there are such fundamental differences at the very foundation of their belief systems that they're irreconcilable.
Yeah.
What are those? What's the starting point? Because you even have different starting points. Conservatives start in one place, and progressives start in another place.
So here's the most fundamental starting point. What is ultimate value to your group? For conservative Christians, where you get ultimate value, what you value more than anything else is, your relationship with God, but your relationship with the Bible as well. That you take the Bible seriously and you try to do everything in it, and you use it to proof text your life. You know, it's perfect, but that's what you do. That's not the starting point for progressive Christians. For me, the humanistic ethic of social justice is a starting point. That's what you use to orient your life by.
Mm.
And so that, I think, is the most fundamentalist difference between two groups.
Mm. And conservatives start with?
They start with their interpretation of the Bible.
So the Bible's at the foundation of it. That's why, that's one of the things that surprised me is in your research, because I always thought, coming from more of a conservative Christian background, I would think, and I get frustrated with how politically outspoken many of my brothers and sisters are, but yet they don't seem to be biblically informed or biblically based. It seemed like their conservatism, even though they say it was rooted in faith, is actually much more of a conservatism politically and looking for political power.
Yeah.
So
honestly, I went in the book thinking somewhat similar thoughts, and the data showed me otherwise. That progressive Christians are more likely to engage in politics than conservative Christians.
So is that because of the root foundation of what their system is?
It could be. It could be, yeah.
What was the impetus then that really showed the difference between the two? I mean, when you say the research shows, because like you said, you had a similar starting point. When was the tipping point the other way?
It's really just running the data. As I ran the data, and I saw that progressive Christians do prioritize non-Christian but progressive groups over Christian groups. And then, as I actually really helped out with the quality of the interviews, that it comes out some more. I also joined a couple of listservs, and still called listservs, discussion groups on Facebook. And I joined a couple of ones that were progressive Christians, and that really was an eye opener. I didn't use any of that in the book, for just because it would have been inappropriate. But that was an eye opener, how progressive Christians think about things, and they do see conservative Christians as not being part of their group, not being part of their faith, not just being a progressive Christian, but not being part of the Christian faith. If you believe that, then over time, unless there's a military intervention, you're going to develop a different religious set of beliefs.
Do you find, though, that progressive Christianity, as time has gone on, that and I mean, you just wonder, you're moving away from Christianity and its root. I mean, you can only say that you're a Christian without holding on to the Bible for so long, I would think. After a while, it becomes, what's the point of even maintaining the title?
I don't know, Jews do that all the time.
That's true.
Jews.
That's more ethnically. That's ethnic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ethnic and religion. There is an ethnicity to it, but I mean, they still claim their Judaism as far as religiously, even though they're an atheist.
So progressive Christians, then, would you put it in ethnically? It seems to me that these are, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I might well be if I'm misremembering this or I've read something else, but are they predominantly white, college-educated people?
Yeah, they're overrepresented among race, whites, and education. Yeah.
And what are the hallmarks then of progressive Christianity?
Well, we try to go into this open-minded, and we argue that the hallmarks is what we call a humanistic ethic of social justice that orients them, what they value, what they see as good and evil, their purpose in life. That this sort of issues of social justice is a key element.
So social justice then is the kind of the axis on which it turns?
I would argue so, yes. I'll give you a great example is homosexuality, right? So the conservative Christian looks at that and says, okay, what does the Bible say? The Bible says it's okay, fine. If not, then not so fine. Progressive Christian looks at that and says, well, it's not important what the Bible says, it's how it fits into our interpretation of social justice. If our interpretation says this is okay, then it's okay. If it doesn't, then it doesn't.
So the social justice, though, seems to be formulated perhaps by what Carl Trueman talks about as the expressive individualist. I'm seeing more and more about the expressive individualist and finding meaning within oneself, and especially with the sexual ethic that has been that united in that way. So, I mean, I know we're talking about some kind of high some high theory
Yeah.
here. This is stuff that I love, by the way. This is part of the show, because I do think that people are searching for greater answers than what they've received in the past, and they want to go deeper. And this is why I think your research is so important. I want to go back just for one moment. You mentioned how you became a Christian. I want to hear your salvation story.
When I was a sophomore in college, I set a goal to get a 4.0. And in order to do that, I just basically isolated myself. And that kind of created, I won't say a crisis of faith, because I didn't have real faith at that time, but it kind of created doubts, loneliness. And so that's when I started reaching out to God. I didn't fully understand everything I was saying, but I understood enough that this is where I could find some comfort from this loneliness. So that's kind of in a nutshell my salvation story.
I mean, did you get discipled early on or no?
I was in the Baptist Student Union, and that helped me greatly as far as discipleship.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, George. And I want to recommend people to get the book. And how can people follow and learn more about what you're doing?
My website is georgeyancey.com. Yancey with an E, so it's C-E-Y, not C-Y. That's a different person. And I am on Facebook, George Yancey. I am on Twitter. I think, what's my Twitter handle again? I've got the name of my Twitter handle. I think it's Longhorns. No, I've got the name of my Twitter handle. But just
well, that's
George
all right.
Yancey
Elon Musk will make it all good.
Yes.
He's gonna make it up.
Twitter.
Thank you, George, for coming on the show.
Thank you. God bless.